We don't often get a recession. That's a good thing. There's a lot to talk about today, all the detail in that announcement. So let's get straight into it. Tonight, with me from Melbourne, the Herald Sun's Terry McCrann, and in Sydney, the Australian's economic editor, Adam Creighton. Terry, I want a bit of a global perspective here that I think we need to put on the record. In the UK, GDP's fallen by more than 20%. France, around 14%. The US, just over 9%. Canada, 11.5%. Germany, by around 10%. So it's bad here in Australia, but it could have been worse.
Well, it's exactly, Peter. It's a little bit better than everybody else, dramatically better than the UK. The big thing that made a difference was JobKeeper and JobSeeker. But for those two programs, we would have had a drop well into the double digits, well over 10%. And the other thing which is sort of stuck under the radar a bit is China once again has come to our rescue by that enormous amount of iron ore that it kept buying at higher prices. That fed back into the economy very positively as well. Just like after the GFC, China saved us. But this was a recession all around the world, most bizarre because it was ordered by governments. Governments ordering businesses to close, governments ordering workers to lose their jobs.
Adam, there were some moves too by the RBA. I'm keen for your view on that and the announcements today, the numbers today.
Yeah, certainly the Reserve Bank earlier this week, they increased this thing called a term funding facility from 90 billion to 200 billion. And this is basically a way to subsidise the banking system, if you like. So the banks can go to the RBA and they can get very cheap loans at 0.25%. And the theory is that they will pass on those cheaper rates to households and businesses. So, but I think the interesting point about this is, to some extent, the banks are being quasi-nationalised or quasi-bailed out, if you like, by the central bank here. I think that's a point that's not been made yet, but I think that is certainly some truth to that.
Terry, I want to go to some things that you have written in the 2019-2020 financial year. As a country, we sold $77 billion more in goods and services into the international marketplace than we purchased back here. Now, is that the first sort of bit of good trade news since 1973, I read?
Well, we've had some similar, nothing like this before, but the big news was not so much the trade surplus. We have had trade surpluses previously, but the overall current account surplus, which brings in the monies we have to pay overseas to foreign investors and to foreign owners versus what we earn overseas. Things like freight and insurance and all those sorts of things are included in that. We had our first trade and current account surplus since 1973 in the last financial year. That's extraordinary. And back in 1973, it was a very tiny surplus. This last year, we had a very big surplus. So bizarrely, in the context of the world that we're now living in, we're actually paying our way in a way that we haven't really been able to do so in the global marketplace. It means our foreign debt has actually fallen and our foreign liabilities have actually fallen over the last 12 months.
Adam, I know you've written a lot about super. We've talked a lot about super on this program. We had two former PMs out there banging the sort of drum about any sense that we might move or defer this increase to super eventually to 12%. It's Paul Keating and, God help us, Kevin Rudd. But it looks more and more likely, isn't it, that it's going to be deferred?
Yeah, look, certainly if I was a betting man, that's what I would say would happen. And clearly the two former PMs are very worried about it, and that's why they got up the lectern and in Kevin Rudd's case even had to swear. But the reality is they don't really have very strong arguments. In fact, they have no arguments. They just have vitriol.
But just on that point though, Adam, I mean, they never declare the self-interest. The union leaders and the former Labor politicians who sit on the funds and get the directors' fees. I mean, it's part of the left's agenda to have this shareholder block inside big companies to say to BHP, get out of coal. I mean, this is the agenda more than it is helping workers.
No, look, that is certainly right. Look, the Labor Party, sadly, I think, is increasingly a mouthpiece for the industry funds. I mean, they defend this increase so trenchantly in public, and yet it's very clear that it's not great for ordinary working people, especially those on low incomes, at a time when they kind of really need as much of a wage as they can get. So, look, I mean, I think the government will, at the very least, defer the increase. I hope that they bin it all together, of course, but it remains to be seen until October.
And Terry, last thing, there's some concerns about the residential housing market, that it's going to really suffer over the next few months. Talking about defaults for investors who have rental properties out there, struggling to get the tenants, or the tenants wanting to pay quite reasonably if they're not working, lesser rents, but then the property owner being left with the mortgage, and all manner of difficulty in terms of selling properties, even if it's your own home, trying to move in and amongst all of this COVID nonsense. Where are we up to, do you think?
Well, like everything out of this COVID nonsense, we're really going to only find out as we go into the new reality. But fundamentally, obviously, the housing market, the property sector has taken a hit. And the big thing that's going to play into it, in addition to the economy, the downturn in the economy, the recession, is the fall off in immigration, because the great driver of rising housing prices through the 2020s up to 2020 has been that rise strong population growth. That's not going to come back, obviously, in the short term. So that's going to add a further dampener to housing values. Yeah,
you're spot on to remind me about the immigration. That's why the Treasury boffins are pushing so hard to get it cranked up in the budget in October. Adam Creighton, Terry McCran, thank you for your time.
Thanks,
Thank you, Peter.